was some nutcase going around killing people. I don't. Well, you know what you told me a few weeks ago about vampires and slayers having convinced you belonged to the loony bin. But after last night, I kind of believe you. Joss's eyes grew wide, his tone serious. Why? What happened last night? Vlad cleared his throat and darted his eyes purposely around. I think I saw a vampire. his ribs to propel him forward a step. Gripping Joss by the arm, Vlad tucked him behind a nearby tree, and tried hard to think of a quick way to escape without being noticed. They could slip back down the hill without a word, but that would require Joss's total, unquestioning silence, something Vlad wasn't sure he could get without mind control or a really, really good explanation. Unless, of course, he put plan to solve all Vlad's problems into effect a little early. Joss yanked his arm away. "What are you doing?" Vlad peeked around the tree at Diablo and back at Joss. A giant lump had formed in his throat, making it difficult to force out words. "You see that guy out there? He's the vampire." Joss rolled his eyes and stepped from behind the tree. To Vlad's horror, Joss's movement caught Diablo's attention. Vlad yanked on Joss's arm again, but Joss shook him off. "Vlad, no offense, but I'm a slayer. I think I know how to spot a vampire. Besides..." Joss waved to Diablo, who nodded in return. Vlad looked from Joss to Diablo and back. Something was very wrong. Joss offered a comforting smile to Vlad. "He's the guy who hired me." Vlad looked back at Diablo, who was smiling calmly. A slight snarl raised on Diablo's lip, so subtly that Vlad was certain Joss hadn't seen it. He glanced at Joss. Poor, unsuspecting Joss. And knew that if he didn't do something, Joss would be Diablo's next meal. He took a deep breath and stepped out into the clearing, keeping his eyes on Diablo the whole time. "You hired a slayer." Diablo's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I had no choice. Believe me, boy, I would relish taking my revenge directly. But you see, our little brush last year left me scarred, which stole the council presidency from me. Last year, killing you would have been Elysian justice. This year, as the council now insists that if you are indeed a vampire, you are to be interviewed and then tried. A justified murder of you from my own hand without the council's consent would be illegal. If I ever hope to regain my presidency, and I will, that force is already in motion. I can't go breaking the highest law by killing my own kind. That would condemn me to death, assuming the council ever consents that you are one of us, and I rather enjoy living." Vlad cast a glance at Diablo's stomach, remembering the hole and the sound of 1,000 spiders as he watched it heal closed. So the lucis. Yes, it's the epitome of weapons against vampire kind. I was fortunate. Had you actually known what it was capable of last year, and had you aimed any higher, we might not be engaging in this conversation. Of course, if it weren't for your brother's blood, I'd be scarred and wounded for life. Unwhole. Diablo's eyes were haunted for a moment, then his features lightened, and the corner of his mouth rose in bemusement. His eyes sparkled some in the moonlight. "It seems I owe you some gratitude. The blood of the Bravas has enormous healing capabilities." "I'm not the Bravas." Vlad's voice wavered. Even he didn't believe his words anymore. Diablo clucked his tongue. "Oh, I believe that you are. Surely even if you can't deny the possibility." Vlad's heart sank. It was possible, no matter how much he wanted to deny that possibility. Vlad weighed his words carefully before wetting his lips and speaking. "If I am the Bravas, that means I'm a vampire. So, why aren't you taking me in to be interviewed and tried for my crimes? Or do you plan to capture me and harvest my blood?" Diablo raised a sharp eyebrow. "No, I have no plans to capture you. I cannot kill you by my hand, but by a wayward slayer's hand, I can. It's really quite simple. I must prove that you are the Bravas, and the only way to do that is to do what I can to kill you. You have what I want, and trying you before the council won't give it to me." With a nervous shudder, Vlad met Diablo's eyes. "What do you want?" Taking a step closer, a wicked smile across Diablo's face. "Ultimately, to take your place as the Bravas. But for that, I require 3 specific items. And, of course, your life." Vlad took a step back but didn't speak. His heart had become eerily quiet, as if by not making any sudden movements, it could escape being ripped from his chest. Diablo chuckled, low and metallic. "If you are the Bravas, I believe situation sink in. Then he offered a nod to Joss, who'd been standing strangely quiet this entire time. Almost, Vlad thought curiously, as if he were spellbound. Our dear Slayer here will try to take your life in a moment. If you live, we will have proven beyond all doubt that you are the prophet. And the naysayers, the millions of vampires who insist that the prophecy is nothing but a fairy tale, will at last become believers. Believers who will be forced to follow me as the new prophet once I complete a ceremony that is already in the works. They will obey my law, my customs, without question. No more councils, paperwork, difficulty. I will rule over all vampires with an iron fist. His chest rose and fell quickly in excited breaths. Then, as if snapping out of his delusion, Diablo said, "If you die, I was wrong about you. A shame, really, but nothing I'll feel condolences for. Either way, it is a win-win situation for me." Vlad's mouth was completely dry. Even if he survived tonight, Diablo was determined to kill him. He had to end this. Running away wasn't an option, unless he ran long enough to get Otis's help, but that would require an escape plan, and not just from Diablo. His eyes flitted to Jazik and back. Jazik was standing behind Diablo. Running his hand over his pocket, Vlad relaxed him. He still had the Lucius. He could end this all with a touch, and good aim. But he needed time and distance. Slowly, he lifted his foot from the ground and took a step back. "Otis said that you and my dad were friends." "We were. But Thomas is dead. What greater gift can I give him than to send him his son?" "How'd you know Joss would bring me here?" Vlad risked another step. Two more, and he'd have the distance he needed to put a big hole right through Diablo and his sordid plan. As for what to do about Jazik and Joss after that happened, he had no idea. "You act as if planting suggestions in the mind of a human is complicated." A smirk danced on Diablo's lips. "It isn't. Neither is blocking from his thoughts. The fact that Jazik and I are of the same species that he is hunting, or keeping him in check during our little reunion. So why did you wait all year long? It's not like Bathory is in Metropolis. I'm not exactly hard to find." Another step, one more, and Diablo's holier-than-thou attitude would be justified. "Though you are of the utmost importance, sire." Vlad thought he detected a note of sarcasm, but it was difficult to tell. "Being fully healed is not enough to regain my presidency. However, if I take the council 9 months of logs documenting the procedures and locations of the Slayer Society, the council will quickly warm to me, as I assure you." Vlad snorted and slowly lifted his foot. "Don't you find any irony in a vampire sucking up?" Diablo's pinched expression oozed impatience. "Enough of this. It's time to face your destiny, Vladimir Todd." Vlad reached into his pocket and withdrew the Lucius. He held it up and pointed it straight at Diablo's chest. "Not so fast." Diablo was about to make an attempt on his life. He formed apology after apology in his mind, but none sounded anywhere near sensible. What was he apologizing for? Joss was the one in the wrong here. He almost said precisely that, but there was something else that kept his attention. The fact that Joss seemed completely oblivious to Zeke and Diablo now, almost like he was being made to focus only on Vlad and the task at hand. Behind Joss, Zeke handed Diablo the Lucius. Diablo smiled and slipped it in an inside pocket of his jacket. Under his breath, Diablo said, "That's 2 of the 3 items we require, and the 3rd will collect soon enough." Joss withdrew the wooden stake, and in the glint of silver at its tip, Vlad found his voice. "Henry knows." Joss' brow creased. "What? What do you mean? You told him I'm a slayer." Vlad shook his head slowly. He kept darting his eyes between the vampires behind Joss and the weapon in Joss's hand. "He knows I'm a vampire. He's known since we were 8. He keeps my secret from me. Nellie does too. So you see, no one in Bathory was ever in danger from me. I drink donated blood, and never from the source. I know you think that vampires are evil monsters, but I'm not. I'm different." Joss cast Vlad a doubtful glance. "You're lying. Henry tells me everything." "Not this." Behind Joss, Diablo whispered something to Zeke, who nodded. Vlad pushed it with his mind until he had a headache, but couldn't read either of their thoughts. Pushing as hard as he could, he thought to Otis. "Help me, Uncle Otis. Diablo is alive. Do you hear me? He's alive and trying to kill me." But there was no answer. He took a very slow step back and wondered if he could outrun them all. "If you kill me, Henry will find out you're a slayer. Your whole family will find out." Joss stepped closer, matching Vlad's pace. The kindness had gone out of his eyes. "I can live with that." He hefted the weight of the stake in his hand and raised an eyebrow at Vlad. "But you won't." Joss broke into a run. He thrust the stake forward, its tip gleaming in the moonlight. Vlad dodged it and sprinted across the clearing. He turned back to Joss and held his hands up. "You don't have to do this, Joss. Think about it. Who's the real monster here? It's Diablo that set this up. You and I are friends." Vlad locked eyes with Joss and pushed hard with his mind. With a dizzying rush of blood to the head, he slipped into Joss's thoughts with ease. Joss gripped the stake in his hands. Friends or not, he had to do it. Had to kill Vlad to save Cecil. She was dead, yes, but every time he took another vampire down, he would feel her soul growing just a little lighter. He was easing her pain now in a way he'd been unable to. He was easing her pain now in a way he'd been unable to in her final moments. But wait, Vlad was his friend. How could he take the life of a boy he'd reached out to, who understood what it was like to lose someone close to you? He couldn't. He couldn't. Vlad pulled out of his thoughts and waited, hoping that this would all be over soon, or at the very least, that he and Joss would be on the same side, facing Diablo and Zeke as a team. Joss paused for a moment, clearly mulling over the thoughts Vlad had placed in his mind. Then, shaking his head, he retrieved a vial from the case with his free hand and opened the lid. His eyes were clear, cold. "You're a bloodsucker, and I can't let you live." Vlad watched the vial in horror. "Garlic juice. Great." He pushed again, once more invading Joss's thoughts, trying to gain control. A searing pain shot through Joss's head, as if his brain was the subject of a tug-of-war. He focused on the task at hand, which flitted through his mind in one single, rambling direction. Kill Vlad, kill Vlad, kill Vlad, kill Vlad. He clutched the bottle in his hand and stood, his eyes on the beast and the monster that was so like the creature who'd taken his Cecil. Monster. This was Vlad, one of his only 2 friends. He should at least talk to him, maybe help him fend off these other jerks before he did something stupid. Vlad pulled out of Joss's mind again and looked at Diablo, certain he'd been controlling Joss's thoughts. He cleared his throat, unsure if his skill at mind control would be enough to deter the Slayer, and returned his gaze to the small glass bottle. "You'd kill me just because some guy told you to. Some guy who is, by the way, a vampire." Joss pursed his lips and glared, tightening his grip on both the vial and the stake. "I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. I could give a damn what he is. This goes beyond a sense of duty, Vlad. Now it's personal." Vlad's jaw dropped. "You've lost him." corners of his mind, he saw Otis's face, grim, determined, sorrowful. Vikes' voice invaded his thoughts. Be still, Malachi Diable. And Vlad was still. After minutes, hours, days, Vlad couldn't be sure which. Lights pierced the darkness, blue and red. They appeared in circles and brought with them the wailing of a banshee. This is it, then, Vlad thought. I've died, and this is what the afterlife is like. He thought there were supposed to be harps, pearly gates, and people flying around with big, feathery wings. But there was none of that, only pain and darkness, with the occasional odd sound and weird, colored lights. With a gip, Vlad took a deep breath and ignored the weird slapping sound coming from his chest. Otis's face loomed once more above him. Vlad began to speak, to warn his uncle about Diablo and Joss, but a wave of blackness dragged him back under. He floated there in a haze for a long time, just below the edge of consciousness. When he surfaced again, it was Janelle's voice. Only he couldn't make out what she was saying. They were sobbing. He tried to tell her he'd missed her, but couldn't manage to open his mouth. Time moved again, and Vlad returned to his haze. Voices kept him company, though he didn't recognize most of them. After what seemed like an eternity, Vlad forced his eyes open. His eyelids felt heavy with sleep, but he saw that he was lying on a crisp white bed. A tube stuck out of his hand. It led up a long silver pole to a clear bag marked with colored stickers. One of the stickers read morphine. Another tube stuck out of his other hand. This one led to a bag of blood. No wonder he wasn't hungry. And he was alive. His heart ached, but it was beating. His lungs burned, but they were breathing. His body hurt all over, but he lived. He survived, somehow. He wanted to thank whoever had brought him here, to hug someone, anyone, and tell them he loved them, to see Nellie and Otis and Henry again. And if he ever managed to get out of the hospital, he was going to take Meredith Brookstone to the Freedom Fest dance again, and afterward, he was going to give her a kiss that she'd never forget. He was alive. Impossibly, he was alive. And he was in the hospital, where doctors and nurses would surely notice his hunger for blood and his sharp as razor's fangs. Vlad turned his head, feeling less heavy, and looked at the nurse, who was checking the graph that was being printed by a machine next to his bed. His lips were dry when he parted them to speak. Where am I? The nurse looked up at him and surprised him. You're in Stokerton General Hospital. Are you in pain? Vlad licked his lips. No, just thirsty. Without a word, the nurse moved out the door. When she returned a moment later, she had a cup of water. Vlad sipped it slowly through the straw. He cleared his throat and asked, Is my aunt here? The nurse smiled and patted his arm. She just stepped out for a moment. I believe your uncle is in the waiting room. Would you like me to get him for you? Vlad blinked. Otis is here. Without answering or waiting for Vlad's reply, the nurse disappeared out the door again, leaving Vlad just ashamed we couldn't get there in time. Jaw staked me. He's the slayer. Vlad fought back tears at the memory. Otis's forehead greased. We know. Otis offered a nod. Vicus and I. The moment I received your letter about Jazeek's attack, I boarded a plane for the Americas, but I was arrested in France by the Parisian Council. Vicus managed to aid in my escape from Elysia just days ago, after he obtained proof that Diablo was still very much alive. We were in the car minutes from Bathory when I heard your telepathic cry for help. We each tried to reach you, but Diablo must have been blocking your mind up to that. I suspected Dago charm, but can't be certain. Tears escaped Otis's eyes when I saw you there, with that hunk of wood sticking out of your back, and all that blood. He swallowed hard. I just never thought I'd get the chance to teach you all of the things that I want, to show you all that I can. There's so much I have to tell you, so much time I want to spend with you. Vlad took a deep breath and coughed some at the odd tickle in his chest. I've never been to the hospital before. Won't they know I'm different? Otis dried his eyes. It took us a while to convince Nellie that you had to come to the hospital in Stokerton. We have doctors on staff here, nurses too. You're under their care right now, so as not to raise suspicions. Vlad blinked. So that nurse. One of our kind, yes. There was a soft knock on the door, and then it swung open, revealing Vicus. He was still wearing his fur jacket, and on his brow glistened small beads of sweat. It is warm here in your country, Vladimir. Vlad smiled. Yeah, you might want to lose that coat. As Vicus was slipping off his jacket, Vlad glanced at Otis. When Jazeek bit me, I felt really strange. Hot, dizzy, heavy. But I didn't feel like that at all when you gave me my mark. Was it because Jazeek was trying to kill me? A strange silence fell over the room for several moments. Then, clearing his throat, Otis said, No, Vladimir. Jazeek wasn't trying to kill you. That would be against Elysian law. However, just as some vampires believe that the blood of the Bravas has great healing capabilities, some believe that if you were to drink enough of his blood, you could strengthen yourself completely against sunlight. Likely, Jazeek believes that you are the Bravas, or perhaps he drank so much just in case you were. Vlad thought about the healed hole in Diablo's stomach and emitted a shuddering sigh. He wet his lips. So, what happened to Jaws? Otis and Vicus exchanged glances before Otis said, wants to speak with you. Vlad furrowed his brow. Jaws. His hand went instinctively to his bandaged chest. Vicus nodded. I will stay in the room to prevent incident. Vlad shook his head. He didn't need a babysitter or a guard. Jaws, despite all this, was Vlad's friend. But when Vicus looked at Vlad, Vlad knew there would be no convincing him of the friendship he'd shared with the Slayer. He took a sip of his water and sat it down on the table next to his bed. When can I see him? Vicus stood very still, eyeing Vlad, as if there was something he wanted to share with him. But when Vlad raised an eyebrow at his Russian friend, Vicus merely moved to the door and opened it without saying a word. Jaws was standing out in the hall, staring intently at the floor between his feet. He walked into the room with hardly an upward glance. Vicus closed the door and stood protectively behind Jaws until Vlad shook his head. Then Vicus chose a seat nearest Jaws. It would have to do. Vlad kept his tone clipped. The guy did stab him in the chest after all. Why are you here, Jaws? Jaws looked up at Vlad, but only for a moment. Not to apologize, if that's what you're expecting. Vlad pursed his lips together. You tried to kill me, and you can't even manage a feeble "I'm sorry." Don't you think I deserve at least that? Jaws shook his head. The floor had apparently lost its interest as he was looking into Vlad's eyes. It wouldn't mean anything, because I wouldn't mean it. You don't have to mean it, Jaws. Vlad took a breath, not too deep, as the pressure of the bandages prevented him from doing so, and quieted his tone. But it would be nice to hear. At least pretend you care that I'm lying in a hospital. Jaws winced. His eyes grew moist, but no tears fell. I do care. Vlad met Jaws' gaze. Then why? Why did you do it? Money? Sport? Because I'm a monster? Because it's my job, Vlad. A tear betrayed Jaws' stern expression and rolled down his cheek. It hung briefly from his jaw before letting go and free falling to the floor. black seal bearing the initials SS Slayer Society. He pulled the flap open and withdrew a small sheet of parchment. On it, in Joss's handwriting, was a single short phrase written in stark black ink: "Friendship over." Vlad took a shudder breath and tucked the note back into the envelope. Henry closed his own locker and was fiddling with the lock. Vlad watched him without interest. Eddie Poe passed by and offered Vlad a glare. Apparently, near-death experiences aren't enough to get the media off of your back. The Eddie situation was something he'd have to deal with eventually, but for now, just knowing Joss wasn't around to hurt him anymore was enough. More than anything, Vlad just wanted his freshman year to be over. Not that he expected his sophomore year to be much better, especially if Eddie didn't get over his monster obsession. But hey, a guy can dream. Vlad's grip on his backpack strap tightened. He turned around and for a moment forgot how to form coherent words. Strange how a pretty girl's face can render you speechless. Meredith smiled. I was just wondering if I'd see you at Freedom Fest tonight. Her hair was tied up in a ponytail adorned with a pink satin ribbon. Vlad had to concentrate to keep from reaching up and running his hand over her silken tresses. He managed to smile. Of course. Are you going to the dance with anyone? The blush in Meredith's cheeks deepened to shade. That depends on you. Henry took his cue and moved down the hall to first period. Vlad dropped his backpack in his locker and retrieved his books from his first 2 classes. He shut the door and took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. How about I walk you to class and we can talk about it some more? Actually,